Well, I am super excited to introduce to you all our panelists. I'll go through and introduce them one by one before we get started on the fun questions here. We've got Naomi Ionita, partner from Menlo Ventures. She is leading the firm's investments in early stage data and AI-enabled SaaS companies. Very relevant. Sits on the board of Orb and AI, and previously served on Fleetsmith's board until its acquisition by Apple. And prior to VC, Naomi was one of the first product-led growth leaders in B2B, starting at Evernote over a decade ago, where she built the growth and monetization team on the company's path to 100 million users, and then again as the VP of growth at Invoice2Go, the top grossing business app that was later acquired by Blur.com. She is a sought-after advisor as one of the original mentors to Reforge, and as an active speaker across communities such as SaaStr, Lenny's podcast, Traction, First Round Angel Track, and more. We have Sara Yamase, who is a partner at Simon-Kucher. She's the head of Simon-Kucher's software, internet, and tech practice in North America, and has worked with over 100 clients across multiple software and tech-enabled sub-verticals. She works with companies to align their monetization strategies with their growth ambitions through insights into customers and segment needs, compelling packaging strategy, value-based price structures, and implementable insights to drive sustainable revenue growth. She's also been an internal editor for multiple published pieces, including Monetizing Innovation, which we've discussed earlier in the fireside chat, and also the Startup Pricing Journey, which is a white paper on the pricing lifecycle written in conjunction with Bessemer Venture Partners. And last but definitely not least, we've got Josh Bloom, senior partner at Simon-Kucher, with over 20 years of experience in pricing and monetization space with us at Simon-Kucher. And at various points, he's led the firm's software industry practice and its North American operations. And he's helped over 250 companies achieve their growth ambitions as partner, and including many launching AI capabilities, even predating the AI hype here. So I'm super excited to have you all. Thank you very much for being here. So as everybody knows, AI just really skyrocketed last year. We can probably all agree that it's here to stay, right? And you can really measure that hype in numbers. So I just pulled a few numbers for interest's sake here. AI startups raised almost $50 billion last year. I know it was a pretty tough fundraising environment. It was the rare bright spot. And when you look at, when you ask companies, so we run an annual software study, and we ask companies about their investment in AI, and you can tell. So 92% of B2B SaaS leaders expect to launch new products and features using Gen AI and LLM models in the next year and a half. So everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie here. But we're hearing that people are starting to call 2024 the year of reckoning for AI. And in fact, even last year in that same software study, we saw some skepticism from CEOs on the adoption of AI products. The majority actually didn't expect widespread adoption of what they were building in their user base, despite the high hopes for revenue generation, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So, Naomi, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on this? So how have you seen business leaders plan for launching, but also getting adoption from these cool new Gen AI features and solutions they're introducing?
Yeah, this is top of mind for the whole industry right now. Should have thought?
Yeah.
Very much top of mind. This is a topic I was really passionate about at Menlo. We were thinking, where are we as an industry as far as true AI adoption? And it's clear 2023 was the year of the frenzy, the hype, experimentation. We were all tire kicking and trying new tools, but 2024 is really the year of the hard work of getting AI into production and getting it into our everyday workflows. To chase down this question, we actually did our own primary research. We interviewed dozens of C-suite executives. We ran a survey of over 450 enterprise executives to understand their perceptions of AI, their concerns, use cases, budgets, build versus buy decisions. And we published a really comprehensive report on the topic. And so what we learned is, the promise is real. We all believe we can be smarter, better, faster at our jobs and in our personal lives. And we know that AI is going to permeate, all the technology that we use, all the use cases throughout our day. But the reality is, whether you are an AI native application or an AI retrofit, you still have to solve a real pain point. This is first principles at the end of the day. It's not technology in search of a problem. It's like, what is the pain point that you're solving? And it has to provide hard ROI. It has to still navigate sales and procurement process. It still has to meet legal and security reviews. So where I spend time at the application layer, these are still SaaS businesses, and it's still business as usual. And so this promise and this hype and these cool demos at the end of the day have to be reflected in the product itself. In this survey, we asked what the biggest barriers to adoption are today. And the number one, first and foremost, was performance gains. Really the hard ROI I talked about. The demo looks cool, but does it actually work? There's a real last mile problem with a lot of these products out there. They seem really cool, and you actually go to use them in your use case, your personal needs, and they're just not quite right. So that was by far the number one reason. Number two were data and privacy concerns. And so that's another thing that, again, if you're doing enterprise sales, it doesn't go away because of the AI frenzy. In fact, the bar's higher now because people are concerned about how their data is being used and any risks of hallucinations or nefarious data use. And the third was around sort of data and integration friction. So there's a lot of preparedness that needs to happen on the customer side, even adopting these tools and kind of baking them into existing infrastructure. So it's just a bit of cleaning house and kind of setup that folks are in as they adopt new tools. So anyway, I think that we all buy into the promise, but it's just still a slog of building a product, getting into production, having it be truly performant. So that's a bit about what we learned from our research. And it resonates. I saw a lot of nodding alongs. I think we're living it every day as customers.
A little bit going. Yes. There you go. Oh, look, is this working?
Okay. A little bit going back to what the earlier conversation was, right, on making sure that there's value in the product and that folks actually have a use case for it. Sara and Josh, how do you think through this challenge of driving adoption of AI while also protecting some monetization upside?
Sure. That dead.
Sure, I can go first. Driving adoption is still key. And I tend to break down the world into folks who are disruptors, AI native versus incumbents. And I think that that sets the parameters for a lot of different decisions that you'll face. The idea that a seat-based model is dead. It's mostly dead. It's not like Miracle Max. It's just mostly dead because there are a lot of incumbents out there who are still in a transition period where they have hundreds of millions of revenue tied up in seat-based models. And to give you a hard example, I worked with a customer support software company recently. When we looked at the level of activity in replies, conversations, however you want to describe that interaction with an end customer versus the number of agents that have been licensed, there's absolutely zero correlation. We had to run the data multiple times just to double check, but there was no correlation between their old model of seat-based, agent-based model and the new reality that the real value is in those conversations. So how do you bridge that gap? It's a little bit more nuanced, but you might have to bridge that gap in different ways. You might have to say there is a core element of functionality that is still human-assisted functionality where Microsoft, ServiceNow, GitHub, they've all not just launched, but are reporting earnings now on their seat-based model where they're charging on average a 60% premium for seats and seeing huge revenue uptake. But there's other functionality, more autonomous functionality that does not involve a human. Go to town on alternative models that are much more disruptive. And I think a lot of the startups, the disruptors are coming in. They don't have the legacy. They don't have to worry about the seat-based model. And they can come in and use a new model to be heavily disruptive. They can go right to activity-based pricing, or Anthropic having not just usage-based pricing, but tokens of different models of usage Are we talking about a prompt or a full conversation? You can get pretty creative, but also try to make it simple to consume. So I think that's the first task you have to look in the mirror on is where am I in this journey? Am I braving new territory and trying to break and disrupt existing models, or do I still have a legacy that I have to figure out how to transition over time, which might take a few years? Go ahead, Neptune.
Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to add ties a bit to what Naomi was just talking about as well, where, I think there's the difference between what is the reality that people see and the value of what they're offering versus what is kind of the end goal promise. And as with any technology, a lot of the ways people are using and adopting the product is going to matter, and the pace at which the technology is changing is just faster and faster than ever, and very much kind of differently aligned versus how fast we as organizations and its people can adopt kind of new processes and technologies. And the reason why I wanted to make that point is because when you think about, okay, how do we make sure we're both driving adoption, but then also saving potential for monetization? It's, Montevin's, triangle of acquire, monetize, retain, and really being able to balance, hey, am I charging for the promise of what this product has to offer, or am I trying to ramp up the capabilities up front to be able to say, I'm bringing on a lot of people at a more affordable price, getting them hooked, and then also incrementally aligning your price with the value over time. And I do think that balancing act, to Alvaro's point, is not a static exercise. That is an ever-changing exercise that needs to happen in conjunction with how customers are using and adopting the product, and more importantly, how the technology is actually resonating with the client and whether or not they're actually able to get the value out of the product that they're seeing. So I really do see it very much in line with, this is not per se a unique innovation model. Like every innovation goes through this to some extent, but I do think the thing that's fundamentally different this time around is the speed at which it's happening and the speed at which technology is changing, the way we're working is changing, and the way, we're thinking about how our organizations interact with these products is going to change super quickly.
Naomi, can you share any stories or success stories of how you've seen either any of your portfolios or companies out there successfully achieve this balance yet in AI?
Well, this is all playing out in real time. This is a fun one. I think it really depends where we are on the adoption curve. Like, we do a lot of investing at the infrastructure level. And these are companies that are vying to be the picks and shovels to build the foundation that the entire AI industry is going to be built off of. And so for those players, what we're seeing at the foundation model layer is really interesting price cuts. We're seeing we saw one player launch, a competitor launch at a cheaper price. This other player, the next day, cut their price in half. We see the bigger players, the Anthropics and OpenAIs, when new models come out, they do price cuts on their old models on the order of 10x. And so you're just seeing this happen because it's a land grab. You want to be the default solution for all the builders of tomorrow, and win that market share when it's it's not clear who's going to end up on top or how many big winners there's going to be. And so it's that's different. That's more the acquisition mode, right? There's a lot of like, how do you continue to build value over time? But I just want to get those developers, and it's good for the industry because at the end of the day, those price cuts make AI more approachable for the average developer. It's going to get more people building, and as the new models come out, the people that have higher perceived value, higher willingness to pay for more performant models are going to pay more. And so they're creating this bifurcation, and really that's the revenue optimization exercise. It's saying, let's get as many people as possible, let's hit the long tail, the high volume, but continue to push willingness to pay up to the, the high-end buyers. So that's what we're seeing at the infrastructure layer, which is different than maybe the application layer, where some of these are incumbents, like several of you in the room that have been around for a while, and you're thinking, how can I use AI to continue to drive value and maybe push premium pricing? So and it sort of depends where you are on that maturity curve.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One of the other things that we saw in our software study last year was that the expectations for driving revenue for these new AI products and features was actually quite high. So despite the skepticism on adoption, 81% of the CEOs expected significant incremental revenue from these investments, which is a little bit of an industry and interesting dichotomy there. So, Sara, how do you think through the value of AI features and models, and how can you get this additional incremental revenue?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what we've seen play out in the industry lately for what types of AI products companies are launching. And one of the big things that we've observed, and actually we've done a survey with one of our clients to say, hey, we are an AI product, we're in the market, our valuations are off the charts, we see growth off the charts, but when we talk to their customers around what is your value differentiation versus competitors, like what of your key buying criteria that people are evaluating, like what is differentiating you, they saw kind of no differentiation. Their underlying technology is based on ChatGPT, GPT-4, and customers look at it and say, how are you different than this other company that's also based off of GPT-4? Like, I don't understand the difference. And I do think that being able to really differentiate value and win share has to come with differentiation in what your AI does and provides value to the client on, or to customers on. And I do think that there are a couple of areas where I've seen some companies do this. I don't know if well is the right term yet, because I think the chips are still out, but situations where companies are able to either use, proprietary data sets and not just whatever's available within GPT-4, like they're training it on customer-specific data or massive amounts of data that are not available through other channels. That has kind of differentiating value that is unique to an end customer. The other one is to be able to say, hey, I'm taking, some of the insights, and to Josh's point around, is this kind of a incumbent where I'm tying it to features and functionality that are unique to my company and will make my product that much more insightful or that much more productive. That's also another lever where we've seen people actually able to differentiate their generative AI and regular AI capabilities. And then the last area that I'd highlight is just being able to have the incremental productivity and not just, hey, from the fact that I'm having a computer write my words, but really being able to tie it to, what should I do next? Like having it make recommendations for how you should operate better, because it is formed off of a larger set of data that's beyond what we as individual humans can digest in any one particular moment in time. So really being able to have differentiating value, even though, I think the assumption on the numbers that we've seen is people assume, because this is cutting edge technology, that if they just put their cutting edge technology into their product, that they'll see differentiation. No, the fundamentals are still the same. You need to have differentiated value and differentiated value versus your competitors in the market to be able to monetize and have a compelling product.
Josh, monetizing on value is something that, and then still constantly comes up, and it's kind of our ethos. But how do you see costs coming into play? The role as a bigger role in the monetization strategy for Giant?
Yeah, fair question. I think you don't have to wait too long to see the next disruptive trend, which will really put a focus on clouds, which is video. I've already had conversations even this past week about companies that are ready to go to market in the next few months with video generated AI capabilities. And that, I think, is potentially the bigger game changer because, first of all, does anybody really enjoy talking to a chatbot right now? I mean, out of morbid curiosity, you might want to understand what it tells you back, but I don't think anybody really enjoys the process. I think once you're talking about real actors or avatars, people will be willing to engage at a deeper level with AI, and there are companies who are already, as I said, ready to go to market in the next few months and thinking about what that monetization model looks like. And you can glance at the cost structure of LLMs and say, yeah, we have to cover our costs, but fundamentally, we're still going to achieve software margins. You can't do that with video. The production and the distribution of video is much more costly. So you have to start taking seriously things like usage-based pricing on things like per minute of video consumed and things along those lines. So I think cost is going to be an even bigger variable going forward in the next few quarters with a lot of applications.
Naomi, what, from your perspective, are the top 3 challenges that you see in monetizing AI?
One touches on what Sara said, this idea of like the value that you're providing and in a differentiated way. I think part of this reckoning you sort of started the whole conversation off with is a lot of the thin wrappers that are just an API call to OpenAI and Anthropic. Like those, you're not going to make it. It's just that you need more surface area. And then I think as an industry, like the incumbents that really won the first inning, like they have the data, the distribution, the brand, the trust. Trust is paramount in this world of AI. They have the talent to be able to incorporate a co-pilot into their existing software products. And so if you're going to be a net new business, it really can't be a gimmick. It has to be something net new. It has to be a rethought workflow kind of feature set from the ground up. A lot of existing software is open-ended daisy chain of people and product and data, but we're looking for sort of post-feedback loops with AI. This idea of like, which of the generated ideas did people actually use, or how did they edit them, and what was actually kind of in an end product. And so I think it's really powerful to think of these AI workflows from literally ground zero with an AI native mindset and leveraging the latest kind of AI stack from an infrastructure standpoint to come at incumbents with something that does feel novel and not just an open AI call that everyone else is doing and there's no differentiation. So I think the true value creation is definitely first and foremost just hard. It's hard right now with the application layer to know what's going to be durable. The next is the hard ROI we talked about around, you want to see the cost savings, the time savings, or the revenue acceleration. And if you can't point to that, then, I mean, that's not doing any favors as far as commanding some pricing power here at a time when the promise is real, but you got to deliver. So we're all kind of getting a feel for what that's going to look like. And I think the third is this sort of margin profile of these businesses. It can be expensive. If you're giving a lot of this AI for free and you're using one of the expensive models, your margin profile is going to get flipped pretty quickly. So, these things, the thing is, like, this is all an abstraction. It's create a lot of value, make sure you're part ROI, and get your margins in a good place. So I don't think of AI as being this totally new thing in that way. I think of it as an acceleration of, like, we've all been bought into like automation broadly, and AI is the next kind of acceleration of that promise. So I think it's something that's just going to permeate everything. It's going to touch every product we use, every product we build, and you got to figure out these core business principles anyway.
Yeah.
figure it out quicker though, right?
Cool. So one more final question before I'll open it up to the floor in case anybody has any questions they'd like to ask our panelists. And we could just go around the horn on this one, starting with you, Naomi. What would be your single most important piece of advice for anyone in the audience today looking to monetize new AI products or features?
Okay, I'm biased here as a board member of Orb, but my answer, because I came from the operating side, so this is a real, authentic answer. I spent about 13 years building product and then doing a lot of product-led growth and monetization work before coming to Menlo 6 years back. So my teams, we built a lot of this infrastructure in-house. We were very big on, I had such a passion for matching price to value. I had such a passion for how did we think about different customer segments and willingness to pay. And this was just it's sort of religion that I subscribe to, and I'm not on for a really long time. And so I think my biggest piece of advice is having the infrastructure to be able to react to your product changes, your market changes. There's so many companies are flat-footed today and treat pricing as a set and forget mentality. You're constantly building new features and value. Why aren't you being compensated appropriately for that value? It's just such a missed opportunity. And these things sit in engineering queues and backlogs. And that is just dollars that you're not capturing as a business. So I'm very big on having the infrastructure in place to be able to flexibly and reliably iterate and drive that revenue optimization as you continue to build new product and as technologies shift.
So I'm not on kind of the operating partner side, and more on the let's set strategy and be ambitious about what we're doing with our monetization strategy. And I think one of my hopes for this group especially are to be bold with what you're considering in what your monetization strategy is for AI. This is one of those unique points in time, in my opinion, where the folks who both do bold strategies and get it right in alignment with their product can set the tone for the rest of the industry. I think, some of the examples that we've seen historically are, Amazon or a Snowflake driving usage-based pricing and making that a possible and sustainable price model. Other ones that I think have set a tone and had to do so kind of constantly in their business are example like a Procore who are monetizing as a percentage of the contract construction value that they're managing. Like those examples are doing very, very well and have a lot of people coming back and saying, hey, can we do something similar? And I do feel like AI monetization was at that cusp where someone can do something very bold and very smart and be able to set the tone for how the entire industry is being monetized. And to Madhavan's point, like this is, and Eddie's point, this is not just cost plus, this is not a cost plus exercise. Let's be more imaginative. Let's be more bold on what it could reflect.
Thanks. Maybe I'll lean into a little bit more of a product view that fundamentally, I think you're right. There are picks and shovels players who are trying to corner the market and are the ones who are way ahead on revenue at the moment. But in the long run, as a long game, I think operating as vertical or horizontal specific business software applications, the value of the AI interaction is much more driven by the data set than the algorithm. And I think that's what folks have to spend a lot of time thinking about is how can we build out better proprietary data sets? How can we leverage data we have internally? Because that's where differentiation is going to come from. It's 3,000 software companies just rely on OpenAI to build out their underlying data sets. You're going to have a sea of commoditized software. And I think it's incumbent on every software company to think about, what can we do to leverage, create artificially, potentially, data within our organization, within our customer base, et cetera, to drive that type of differentiation in the long run.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Are there any questions out there in the audience?
Maybe you don't get 40 or
It's it and more you.
all right. It's just told I can't ask one.
Yeah.
Unless I'll just kidding.
You're doing it anyway.
Well, I'm basically if I put together what Naomi and Sarah are saying together, it sounds like you're saying first the infrastructure is nimble. So pricing no longer a noun, has to be a verb. Pricing has to be something dynamic and quick that you reach toward bigger heights, right? Second thing that you can act for is because people pay for not value but perceived value. There needs to be a way to perceive whatever AI is reading. Question on that. Does that mean that we should only pursue models where the outcome can be perceived? Because it seems like in the just what increasingly AI is building stuff that's hard to differentiate. Should instead people pursuing AI as entrepreneurs or within their own companies be pursuing it for ends where you can clearly see some kind of outcome metric?
I guess that. I think it's a really important distinction. I say this all the time, that it's not the value. It's not, if you look at someone's pricing page and they have like 5 different value metrics and like a bunch of other features underneath, like you can't just shove a bunch of things down a customer's throat and expect them to care. It's what's the perceived value with that sort of list of offerings. So I'm a big believer in that. It's just like a philosophical way to think about pricing. I think it was interesting in this sort of shift with AI. I think we are still stuck in kind of chatbot land, which is again not what people want to be. But as we migrate to more agentic platforms, I think the interesting thing about what you're saying is like that perceived value might not be me in the UI of an application actually doing something and like seeing it for myself. It might be an agent actually like working on my behalf. And I'm now using that time to focus on some higher order problems or spend more time with my family or start another side gig or whatever. And so this idea of perceived value, I think this reframe might be like, some of this work might actually be just done behind the scenes and I'm not actually like perceiving it in the same way. I'm perceiving in time savings, but it's more of an abstraction than like I'm sitting in the UI and kind of like seeing something like output. So I think that's going to be sort of novel for all of us when we think of like what is the UX going to be for the next set of winning AI products and how we think about monetization when we're not necessarily the one doing the work and it's being done for us. It's going to be a reframe.
The other thing that I wanted to add, and what I've seen with some of the companies who are launching AI capabilities, and I actually mentioned it as kind of my third point of differentiation, is to say, you're not just providing a product or, technology to whatever drive time savings, but more so kind of actionability. I actually think that there's two sides to that coin. And one is what you're saying of like, hey, what is kind of the perceived value? And is it doing something that you wouldn't inherently understand or imagine originally? But I think that there's kind of aspirational, let's dictate how people work versus, let's make people do what they do already better. And I think there's going to be kind of a fine line between that. I had a client a number of years ago. I don't know if anyone's heard of or used like M-Files that allows people to shrink their storage footprint and operate with their documents in a different way. And while that has gained a lot of traction with a lot of companies, the way you work with your files is just fundamentally different. And so I do think that there's a line between, can you sell a different process that's changing the way everyone works and have that be adopted and compelling? Or are you providing a technology that just supplements what a company is already doing and either facilitating it or automating it or making it better? I guess that fine line to me is very interesting to see. Are there going to be winners on both sides? Is it going to be everyone has to define new processes in order to show value differentiation? And that to me is still an open question, but a really interesting one to see how quickly companies can adopt these new products, but also be able to use them effectively.
Thank you. I'll pass it over to Sam. Dr. Naman, inside.
Thank you for your time. I have two questions, one for Sarah and Josh, and one for Naomi. Naomi, one thing you said that really resonated with me is like this 95%. Feels like all these models and everything out there is like this 95% there. It's not quite there. So, in your opinion, like for SaaS company, B2B companies, especially the SaaS bits on the application layer, is the stack, like is the technology stack there for how to do the full 100%? Or are we still kind of like waiting for innovations to happen for us to kind of pivot a little bit? Because, and the other thing is like, to get to 100% feels like, especially at Snowflake, we're very much looking into this. That 5% to get there, it seems to have a very different unit economic impact than that 95%. Like you can get 95% there by an API call, but to get to that last mile, now you're just talking about fine-tuning, retraining. You have to implement RAG. You have to do, embedded text and all these like data enrichment. Should kind of SaaS companies start like thinking about this, or should they take a more of a backseat approach? And then a tongue-in-cheek question for Josh. Seat-based is dead, but at the same time, OpenAI is charging $20 a month. Microsoft's charging $30 a month for Office. How do we reconcile that? Is that going away soon?
Ooh, gotcha.
It's a really good question. I think it comes down to the use case and the tolerance for failure. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you're a marketer and you're using something to help you generate content for a post on social media, or you're an SDR and you're doing some outbound campaigns. The tools are pretty good now to give you something that's, maybe it's 50% of the way there, but it's much faster for you to edit it and tweak it than to start with a blank slate. And so if that's still the exercise of like, there's still a but a seat, like that role still exists at the organization and they can work a little bit faster now. Your tolerance for failures, like you're comfortable with that. You're saying like, I'm still getting leverage on my time. That's different than maybe something where the chatbot's providing healthcare advice to patients and the stakes are just a hell of a lot higher. Or we're pushing to a world where, again, agents are going to do this work for us, and it has to be perfect. If you're going to start sending emails to a bunch of my prospects, I better agree and sign off on what's being sent. That's different than having a human in the loop capability. So I think it comes down to like, how high are the risks and sort of what's our expectation for the product? Is it going to just make me a little bit faster, or am I going to disappear and actually the machine's going to do my job for me? So we're on a bit of like a spectrum here and working towards that end goal.
Yeah, maybe I'll pick up from there. I think that's a distinction of like being made more effective and efficient as a worker, or it might be replaced. And this is where I'll be honest, you could maybe be a little bit skeptical with some of the outcome-based pricing models too, because if we learn from history, outcome-based models work best when there are measurable cost savings, right? Things like procurement software that helps reduce your cost of goods sold. Revenue cycle management software has outcome-based pricing quite often, where it's like collections and things like that. I think psychologically, it's a very different sales process to walk into a company and say, we're going to cut your workers by 50%. And we're going to measure that, and we're going to charge you based on how many people we can replace. I think we're still, maybe we'll get there, but I think right now people are still a little bit uncomfortable with that conversation. I think it's much more, it's an easier conversation to talk about the value, to talk about for enhancing the productivity of workers, or potentially maintaining some seat-based component, or we're charging based on some other business metric or outcome, and usage-based pricing. I think this still, at least for the next few years, probably could be where most of the monetization models are.
We just kind of in 5 years hybrid models.
It is. Yeah. Exactly.
The Canadian Airlines, they should be getting money back.
Thank you for the panel. And maybe just adding an anecdote, and then I had a question also. At our company, I'm at New Relic, and we went through a journey where we went from subscription-based pricing to hybrid, where we have subscription and consumption, and then we went to all consumption-based model. And one of the fascinating things is we also had high conviction. The user-based pricing is dead. And guess what happened? As soon as we introduced the consumption-based pricing option only, a lot of customers said, can I sign a 3-year deal on user-based pricing? Because they're afraid that the consumption is going to take over. Since it is interesting, I think we are in this transition period. Question for the panel, I'd love to hear like what you think are some of the examples. We're talking about monetizing AI. And obviously every example is not going to be relevant to everybody. But just curious, like what have you seen in the industry of companies that are monetizing AI effectively, from your vantage point? Love to hear maybe one example from each of you. Thank you.
Actually,
I can go first. This is like a softball answer, and I think Josh had alluded to it earlier. But I had a client it's not just kind of chatbot, but it's like being able to talk to customers across multiple different channels. So it's not just chatbot, it's not just calls, it's also like social media. And they originally had, being able to change, like they started with how many seats are managing the software to be able to run this model effectively. And they changed over to how many engagement points is it having with customers. And of course, all of that is sustained by tiering. It's not like every single one is nickel and dimes. But I would say like that's the easiest model shift that I've seen. And these guys have actually been around for decades, not just recently. So the shift that they did has sustained some amount of legacy and purchase, aside from just like in the last year they made this change and they're doing well.
One example each. They're trying to get away. Bye. Yes. Yeah. I'm a leader. We work for a number of support companies, AI first. And one of them that just recently left, that's opening AI, into AI, just with their say incredible price box because of that change. But because the topic here is about monetizing AI, and I've been a disciple of value-based pricing for many years, it's much harder to show the value of AI. From one hand, you have the CEO expectations that you see market improvement in revenue increase and so forth. And it's much harder than automation. You can show the value of automation in time saved, a productivity gain. But AI, especially when it's creative AI, it is much more difficult. But the question that is my observation, I'd love to give your thoughts on it. But the question I have is actually the model in here, also in the book, about activation, monetization, and retention. What we are seeing, again, in AI companies, there's element of cost, that variability of, it used to be, the cloud, we actually knew the prices pretty well. You knew the labor costs, but now the data scientists, the cost of the models, and your expectation of constantly improving and both building models and training models and delivering models, that is an element that if you have those three legs tool, but the fourth one is the cost, especially when you speak with your CFO. And I'm not advocating a cost plus model, but that is an element that for AI is that we can competing for excellence and survival in this market. We need to be aware of those costs, especially thanks to companies like Orb and you guys are constantly improving the pricing of the infrastructure companies, that they're not always in a downward direction. So I'd like to get your thoughts on those two aspects.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think this is where a lot of the sort of tinkering is happening. Like, how do you think about where your stack should be, but then optimize for the cost side? And so, kind of goes back to what I mentioned before, where people are finding that for some use cases, let's say 80% of the use cases in their product, using an older model, GPT-3 might be good enough. And it's actually the other 20% where I should spring for using 4.5. 5%. So it's this idea of like, how do you sort of optimize models and when to use different ones based on different use cases, not just for the end customer experience, but really to manage your own cost side. So that's I think it's gonna be a hybrid world as far as these models go. I don't think it's gonna be you just pick one model off the shelf and that's what you use for every single use case and customer touch point. So I think that's a lot of like the model observability players and model evaluation exercise is like understanding where those trade-offs sit.
Yeah, maybe this is foundational, maybe too basic, but I also think we have to separate out kind of upfront research and development costs versus ongoing costs too. The training software example that I was giving before, they said they locked 80 actors in a row that just built them for weeks at a time. And with that training set of 80 actors, they feel they have a good data set, a proprietary data set that they don't have to rely on OpenAI and so on to do video production, as opposed to the very, one training video means getting the right actors in the room at scale thousands of times. But those costs, those upfront costs, aren't necessarily going to be recovered in their pricing model. Those are more the ongoing costs that people have to think about when it comes to just spinning those up. And I think that's why we're seeing, this is still resource intensive. We saw, it was last year, 100 million plus rounds on the Gen AI companies, or maybe you have better statistics. You can tell me, but there's a reason we have venture capital, and I think that these are a lot of upfront costs, but hopefully the ongoing costs are more manageable and people can build profitable models out of it.
I do want to add one more point and I was talking to someone about this earlier today, like the reason why I love software pricing is because you are able to change the value of the product and able to charge effectively for that value and able to kind of change the price metric all at the same time. And those fundamentals to me do not go away just because software now has a cost associated with it. Like the value and whether or not that value is able to give you a margin that you deserve, I feel like maybe squeezed a little bit, but I don't see it fundamentally changing the way we should look at how we monetize AI. But rather, I think Madhavan made this point earlier, make sure that cost is an input to that equation rather than having it dictate that equation.
Yes, hi. Thanks for the panel. Lovely conversation so far. You guys are probably seeing a lot wider scope of companies trying to do pricing for AI, monetizing AI capabilities, whatnot. And it's still early, but are there some questions which are unique to AI-related capabilities or mistakes you've seen companies make that we should be thinking about that we may not see otherwise?
I'll reiterate the point we were talking about earlier. I think Josh also made it in his summary, but I do think that generative AI is a weird kind of contradiction. Like it's both at the cutting edge of technology and capabilities in general, but because a lot of that engine is housed within a few players that allow it to be accessed by many, many companies, the pitfall of just saying, oh, this technology is cool and therefore it will drive value for my company is a very unique situation that I haven't really seen before. Like most companies use, first principles of, am I seeing product market fit? Is my product resonating with companies and my customers? And how do I evolve that over time to monetize effectively and to drive revenue and growth for my company? But I think we went into this technology assuming it was really cool and assuming that it would drive differentiated value when from a product standpoint, without changing it or refining it or making it your own, it is commoditized. And I actually think that's the biggest pitfall / difference in what generative AI is compared to other technologies that we've seen.
question. So I think I talked a lot about pricing and on the demand side, right? Think about CFOs, finance people. How are they thinking about creating budget for AI? Because at least what I've heard is that let's think about X amount of dollars of innovation budget. So in our company, let's take 300 people, the Microsoft AI. And so, because I think in some ways, this almost presumes that your output, your efficiency is going to be much more flexible. But budgets are still very static. So how do you balance those?
I like this question. A lot of the research we did for our report included interviews, and we talked to a lot of people that own automation or like a center of excellence within enterprise companies. And what we heard pretty frequently was there's like this slush fund for AI. There's this separate budget for AI. It's no longer like each department head saying like, what's my budget for AI? There's like these gatekeepers who are the most knowledgeable on AI and can call bullshit on things, pardon my French. But also like, it's still experimentation mode. So by having kind of like sort of new AI products alongside maybe a core product that you've already been using, there's a bit of an A/B test that people are doing to say like, is this actually better? Is this going to replace this other piece of software? Is it going to sit alongside this piece of software? Or was I sold smoke and mirrors and this is going to go away? So I think that these gatekeepers are more and more prevalent at big companies because the answer is we don't know, and these products are still being built. And this idea of what's truly performant, what's going to be my new stack as like a head of finance or a head of engineering or a head of product is all unfolding in real time. So access the slush fund if you want to sort of get into the conversation.
I did want to add the data point that Michelle pointed out earlier, which is when we surveyed, company leaders at different software firms, 90% of them said that they're going to be investing in AI. And I do think that there's a bit of a, this is a ship you have to get on or else you're going to be left behind. So even though I'm talking about commoditization and all of that, like there is kind of a baseline under which people believe everyone's going to move and operate. And if you're not moving and operating fast enough, then you're going to get left behind. And I think CFOs generally understand that.
Right. Perfect. So one more try.
Last one.
Firstly, the thoughts on, we're talking about innovative pricing strategies for AI, but what are your thoughts on big multiple pricing strategies? Like potentially, could you see ChatGPT or the likes being free with ads at some point, or do you think that's not going to happen?
Is there essentially a freemium model that is plausible? Well, certainly what we've explored in some of our projects is, do you give limited interactions for free with AI functionality? So there is a, again, this is more vertical and horizontal specific application software, but there is an opportunity to give people a taste of what's possible, what the interactions look like in a freemium model. So yes, I think that old school approach still has legs. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Audience, please join me in thanking the panel for their discussion.